So in the last 2 days, there's been a lot of interpretation and spin and analysis about Tuesday's election. And people who want to go into this in far greater depth than I do can do as they please. But there's one very significant takeaway from this election, which I think is the most important and has not been the subject of discussion. Now, there's some very obvious things that we saw. One was the enormous turnout statewide for a spring election for the Supreme Court, where there was no mayoral elections or presidential primary. And the second thing that we saw was that Dane County, Madison, smaller than Milwaukee, and Milwaukee County also was exceptional in terms of the size of the vote. When we start looking at individual wards in the city of Madison, we see about a dozen wards in which the vote is significantly higher than it was 4 years ago in a similar election. And the takeaway is that there was a sleeping giant, and it is awake, and that is millennials and college students. While citywide, we saw increases from one end of the city to the other, the increases that we witnessed in the student wards is exceptional. Those increases, in part, can be accounted for with new housing, thousands of units of new housing. And so when you look at wards 50, 49, 50, 51, 53, a significant part of that increase comes from the construction of the James, of the apartment units alongside the rail corridor by Findorf at the end of Doty and Wilson. It's reflected in the construction of that new building at the corner of Johnson and Broome. But where we go into areas where there's not been a great deal of new construction, we are still seeing some very significant increases in turnout. Ward 59, Lakeshore dorms, almost a fourfold or threefold increase in turnout. 58, which is principally Liz Waters, a jump from 56 to 240. 57, which is anchored by Chadbourne, we see a significant increase. 56, southeast dorm area was Celery. And then in those wards numbers in the mid-40s, 46, 47, 48, which are principally running down Langdon Street towards James Madison Park, we are seeing significant increases in turnout. So while everybody's out there wondering whether or not the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce and their outside money had effect, whether Eric Holder and his efforts had an effect, the singular response is, one way or another, millennials have turned out in exceptional numbers, particularly those of college age. And if history is any indication of the future, they are here to stay. We haven't seen anything like this since the period of the elections between 1968 and the mid-1970s. There's a new block of voters, and they showed up. And they showed up in significant numbers. Let me just repeat this for the camera that just arrived. So, again, we had a significant increase in this election statewide. We had a significant increase throughout the city of Madison and Dane County, which led to our even exceeding the vote total from a significantly larger city and county, namely Milwaukee. But when you get through all of that, the most significant takeaway is that in those wards where we've got millennials, where we've got voters between the ages of roughly 18 and 25, the numbers are just simply exceptional. And this is something that anyone running for public office had better recognize, and no number of excuses, no number of creating dichotomies of black and white, blue and red is going to make this go away or is going to address the issues. My guess is that if I was a 19 or a 20-year-old, between the combination of wondering if my classmates and I are going to get shot tomorrow, and if we're not, how the hell I'm going to pay for my student debt, is weighing heavily, and they're not sitting around waiting to see who's going to take care of this when they hit their 40s and 50s. They're saying, we're going to see these issues addressed right now, today, and we're not waiting. So I'll repeat this in a moment, but why don't we do any questions you've got?
You said, the issue of guns and the gun control movement is a big reason why. Do you have any other, reasons why you think the turnout was so huge in that age group?
Well, I think they're recognizing that there's a question of fairness for hardworking people, for hardworking students, for their hardworking parents, and that despite all the data and all the numbers that people are turning out, when they look at their situation and their life and their parents' lives, these young people are saying, we are not going to see this continue. We want more than change. Change is something different. Improvement is what they want. They want things to get better. Now, you look at what's going on in Oklahoma, West Virginia. I mean, you go to college, you dedicate your life to the teaching profession, to a wonderful and honorable way of sharing and inspiring. And, you can't make $35,000 a year. $35,000 a year, you can't pay off student loans. $35,000 a year, you're never going to own a home. And then you add to it the safety issue, because a lot of these folks, these kids, are going to be parents themselves within 10 years. And they're not accepting the bullshit answers that this isn't the right time or there isn't enough money. They want improvement. They want fairness now. And they know, having watched what's going on in this country for the last 30 years, that promises aren't going to make it happen. And I think that's what accounts for these kinds of numbers.
Mayor, in In the 2014 spring election, there was no statewide office, as there was a Supreme Court race 2 days ago. Do you think this is good enough?
That certainly makes a difference. That certainly does make a difference. But again, the turnout in the numbers is something that we have to recognize.
And so even a nonpartisan Supreme Court race, you think that the gun issues that's been in the news and
I think guns, I think debt, the questions of fair employment, and by that I mean, whether you're going to be a teacher or not. Can I get a job in which I can pay off my student debt, in which I can have an opportunity to own a home, or am I going to be looking at numbers in the red for the rest of my adult life? I think that's what's going on.
I think there's something to be said as well about the age of maybe Rebecca Dallett in this election. Do you think as, people try and grab onto the momentum of this turnout that, it's necessary for Dems to have young candidates in order to see that kind of turnout?
Well, but that's contradicted by Bernie Sanders. So I don't think that plays a major role in it. And what I've seen in polling numbers is that while in some areas age may make a minor difference, the more substantive issues will always trump it. So even where someone says maybe age is relevant, then when you say to them, is that going to determine your vote? They can say no. The position of the candidate on taxes, on public transportation, on environmental issues, on clean water, on student debt, that's far more important.
So do you think that Michael Skronik, do you think people, the young voters saw him as a vote for the debt crisis among college goers, or
I think the
NRA thing? But
I think when you add up the whole bundle of issues that are stressing people today, debt, low wages, environmental issues, climate change, I think all of those were relevant and were taken in their entirety. And that was more important than anything else in weighing. You got to remember, we've all got conflicting values. We've all got values within ourselves that sometimes collide. But when you take all those issues, the kind of things that people talk about in coffee shops or over a beer, all that stuff added up to saying, I want a response today, I want it now, and I'm not going to sit here in the coffee shop, I'm going out and voting.
So, Mayor, at the beginning you mentioned, there's been a lot of interpretation, analysis, spin on the election. Soon after the results came in, Governor Scott Walker warned of a blue wave coming. Do you think that supposed blue wave could be sustained in a partisan fall election with a higher turnout?
I don't think we can let Donald Trump or Scott Walker define what is going to happen in terms of public demands for improvement in our society in the next 6 months or the next year. There's again, the kinds of things that I just mentioned. Just take clean water. We got a problem here in Madison and Dane County. We've talked about it. And that is, over the next 30 years, we may have to confront salt in our drinking water as a serious matter. In the meantime, you go up in the northern part of the state, some places it's salt, in other places it's phosphorus, in some places it's nitrates. can't drink the water, or the rivers and the streams are so contaminated that there's no trout left. People are beginning to say it doesn't have to be that way, or the denial of the existence of climate change, global warming. I mean, it's happening, it's here now, and we got some real serious problems that the polar bears are facing right now. And it's not good enough to trot out numbers which don't reflect people's real economic condition. I'll just say this in terms of one of the underlying issues in your question. When Scott Walker said the solution was to cut pensions, to cut health insurance, to deny, and that was part of Act 10, or to deny participation in the Affordable Care Act, to, in effect, lower as many people as possible to a common denominator. The real answer was to raise the standard and to raise our living standard as a state. I mean, if you were someone 8 years ago who didn't have adequate health insurance, unaffordable health insurance, and were 25 years away from retirement without a pension, which gives you more satisfaction? Your next door neighbor being put in the same condition as you, or both of you having that quality health care and that retirement? I think that's what this is about. And I think that's what brought this kind of turnout.
There were some reporters who couldn't even remember the last time there was 80% Dem voting in Dane County specifically. What was some of the local work being done by the City of Madison, by Dane County officials, by the university to kind of drive that turnout?
Well, that's an interesting question, because now we've got it in the context of, hey, not only did more people get motivated to turn out, but they had to do it under more challenging circumstances. Because 4 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, voting was easier. I mean, in Wisconsin, you could show up with a phone bill and a lease, or a phone bill and a credit card bill the day of the election, register and vote. And if you didn't have that, all you need was your neighbor who was registered to come in and say, yeah, that person lives next door at 222. And you were a registered voter. I mean, the whole history of this country up until 5 years ago was to make it easier for people to vote. And now we've got the identification laws. We had attempts to limit as to the hours that city clerk's office could be open, things of that sort. So, yes, from the work we did here as a municipal government in our administration of voting, to turning out the vote and making it as easy as possible, extending hours. We had a press conference a week before the election. Many of you were here for that. Everything we could do to make it, make the polls accessible. That was part of it. And then you had specific campaigns. You had campaigns on campus, the one that Eric Holder attended, and you had partisan groups also involved. But one of the things that's critical here was the effort to get people to the polls, and even with some of the onerous voter suppression tactics that were adopted in recent statutes, to overcome that.
Mayor, in a related note, the city, had filed a civil rights complaint against the state for consolidating the DMV locations.
Yes.
With the argument that it could potentially make it more difficult for
Yes.
voters to get their identification. Do you know what the status of that complaint is?
We're moving forward. We knew it would not be resolved before this election, and my guess is it will take months before we get resolution and an answer.
Your hopes be before the fall election?
I don't anticipate it to be that soon.
Mm.
So, okay. Who came in last with their camera? Did you get enough, or?
Yeah, I'm good. I guess summarize.
Yeah, why don't I just say it one more time? So we have focused on the statewide turnout, which is far higher than we normally anticipate in a Supreme Court race when we didn't have a presidential primary or a mayor's race. We're well aware that Madison and Dane County, despite being significantly smaller than Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, actually produced more votes. And then lost in all of that is what I think is what's really significant here, which is the significant turnout in the campus area, which shows us that millennials are voting, that they, in serious numbers, are participating. And as I said, they don't want just change, they want improvement in their lives. They're looking at everything from violence in the classroom to student debt, and they're not going to wait 40 years to see this improved. I've noted there that wards 50 through 49 through 53 have an increase because of new construction and significant number of new apartments in the area. But when we look at those other wards, those turnouts are significant because you're basically dealing with the same population as we had 4 years ago.